Hey everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight Podcast powered by Outdoor Vitals. Today I've got Brigham on the show, and we're going to further our cause to eliminate some of these fears, help you guys feel more confident when you're getting outside so that you can disconnect from this crazy world and get outside more and do so with more comfort and more confidence. So, keys to getting a good night's sleep outdoors. This is a very popular an important subject for people that are trying to get out more frequently, or even for veterans that have done this forever. You can always pick up little tips. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just all things sleeping outside, how to stay warm, how to stay comfortable, and hopefully we can just really cover all angles of this topic at hand. So, Brigham, how are we doing today?
Doing well.
How long has it been since you've slept outside? Let's start off with that question.
Was I gone last weekend or the weekend before? I can't remember. A week or two, I did a little backpacking trip in Zion National Park.
You've been getting out frequently, though.
Yep.
I feel like you've been optimizing your August and September quite well, and getting some time out there. So you've been sleeping good.
Yeah.
If you say no, we end the podcast.
I've been sleeping pretty good. At times too warm, but that's okay.
That's better than the alternative, right?
Yep.
Okay. I'm excited to approach this subject. It's one that I've definitely gone from one end of the extreme to the other, I feel like, as far as having terrible, as a kid, I slept so bad outside all the time. I was constantly frozen or just whatever it was, just never good. And then to where now, I need to count it up again for this year, but usually, sleeping in a tent or outside 30 nights a year, it seems like. And it's not something that's foreign or like that I dread or anything like that. It's like, no, I can sleep really well out there. And so there's some takeaways there. So hopefully that's really what we're getting into. And if you're someone who's got some apprehension at all about sleeping outside, about either poor sleep quality or being cold, I think those are the two main subjects that we'll really be talking about today. So where do you want to start off? Any particular areas where you're like, yeah, let's just start right here today and dive into it?
I was kind of thinking about it leading up to this, kind of how you just you sort of passively broke it up into sleeping, what did you say, comfortably or warm? So maybe that's a way we could do it, is break it up into like temperature, like how to sleep optimally for temperature, and then how to sleep, let's just say, kind of like some of those
little
comfort
things.
Intangible
comfort
things.
I like that.
So, yeah.
Okay. So speaking on the subject of sleeping warm outside, what do you feel like is like the number one piece that people need to be aware of?
Well, it's tough because there's a whole system. There's a whole system of things to account for. Because to me, it's almost like you're just the environmental factors. They are what they are, and our way of staying warm enough is by just accounting for all the different variables. So
maybe let's start with what people get wrong the most frequently.
Yeah.
Where people go wrong the most with being cold outside or cold while they sleep.
I think probably up there in the list would definitely be sleeping pad selection. I think a lot of people consider the sleeping bag / quilt as like the key component, and it is, but without the pad, it just does not live up to whatever it's rated for. So it's almost like with that pad, no matter what, it will rob you of the right temperature.
I don't think people go to the store and say, all right, I'm going to go sleep outside and it's going to be 30 degrees and be like, I can get by with a 40-degree sleeping bag. Like 90% of the time, they're like, because they can see a temperature rating on a bag, they're buying that cold or colder. Mm-hmm. But pads are tricky because they don't say it that way. They have R values. And so then it's like, well, what's this conversion? And maybe I don't understand it. And it's not as, you don't think about it as much. So I don't think that people get their temperature their sleeping bag temperature is wrong nearly as much as their pads because of some of that education side of things. But just like what you're saying, I think like a good way to demonstrate this for those of you that are watching would be like this microphone stand that I've got right here. If I wrapped my hand around this metal and held it, if it was cold out, this metal would be freezing cold, and it's going to still all of the heat out of my hand as quickly as possible. Even if I had a nice glove on and I was squeezing onto this, applying pressure, all of that insulation in the glove is going to compress, and my hand's going to be extremely cold in no time at all, right? And that's exactly what a pad is doing underneath this, but people don't often visualize that. So pad to me is number one. So maybe quick, and that's something that we've probably covered a decent amount in the past. So maybe just quickly some high level things that we can tell people to look for in a pad, to optimize or to shortcut not getting in the weeds of what exact pad do they need and things like that.
Yeah. I'd say the quickest and easiest answer I could come up with is you'll very rarely ever feel like you have too warm of a pad. So maybe that's one way of looking at it, is just buy the warmest darn pad that you can get.
You think about sleeping on your mattress at home, that's got a lot of R value, and no one complains about it, right?
Right. So, if you just want to hey, let's just solve this, we have one pad and that's it, then just buy the warmest pad, and that warmth is going to be evaluated or measured by R value. So if you're shopping around for a pad, look for the term R value and just find the one with the highest one. In terms of warmth, you're never going to be complaining that you felt so warm underneath. I just never met anybody that has encountered that problem. However, what I'm getting at is you can have say a 7 R value pad and be sleeping in 50-degree temperatures with a 50-degree top quilt, and half of it's not even on your body, and you're not going to feel like you're too hot because you had too warm of a pad. You're going to feel too warm because you have a quilt on. It's interesting how that flip-flops on you. But so that's the quick and easy. But things to look for, like I mentioned, is R value. That's how well the pad resists heat loss coming from underneath your body. I think most people are, I'd call them 3-season backpackers.
Yeah.
And I'd say for a good, safe 3-season sleeping pad R value, you want at least a 3.2 in the low threes, at a minimum. Again, with seasons that can be a little bit misleading, because some seasons you'll still get quite cold, but I'd say temperate weather, where it's not going to be freezing at night, I think an R value in the 3s is probably where you're going to be safe. And then if you're going to be approaching freezing, or let's just say maybe below freezing, you want to have an R value closer or at 4 or warmer. If you're getting into the teens and single digits, then I think you want to be in a pad with a 5 R value. And if you're going to be below 0, I think people need a 6 R value pad.
Yeah.
In terms of other things to look for, everybody has ways that they sleep differently, and there's different structures or kind of baffling structures that make up a pad, and those are, you can see those when the pad is inflated, so they'll have little kind of, I don't know what you call them, kind of quilted, baffling, where it kind of looks like a bunch of little pillows arranged. Some of them are just horizontal or lengthwise tubes, and those can affect people differently in terms of comfort. But in terms of warmth, I think R value is it is the most important thing to look for.
Yeah, I think your outlay of those temperatures is really good too. So if you missed that, rewind that back and listen to that again. That's a really good kind of guiding grade per se of temperature to R value ratio. I can't speak to this personally, but maybe I shouldn't even bring this up. But there are YouTubers and people out there that really dive into this and test a lot of pads, Justin Outdoors being one of them. And, he even talks a little bit about, even with the newer R-value testing that there is, it doesn't always give you the full picture of how it sleeps outside. So just take that for what it's worth. Our Oblivion sleeping pad is a 3.5 R-value pad. I've taken it down into the high teens. I don't think that's necessarily the recommended amount, but which is why I would probably go back to what Brigham said of like taking something like that, a 3.5, and being like, okay, this will take me to like 30 degrees very comfortably. And then potentially looking for an even higher R value when you're dipping underneath that, or layering underneath it with additional pads, which is one thing that I would just add here, and will probably come up later too, is adding something like our 1/8 inch foam pad underneath, or even a thicker pad underneath, is a great way to stretch the length or the season of your sleeping pad, because there's not a bunch of options for 5+ R value pads out there. So if you're looking at a 3.5 to a 4.5 R value pad, which is where the bulk of good insulated pads are at, you can stretch the seasons with those by layering foam and stuff like that underneath them. So
yeah, for a much lower cost.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna have one pad, but you want to still use that same pad in colder weather, you can buy a $30, maybe $40 closed cell foam pad that has an R value of like 1.8. Put that underneath, and like with that setup, that's very reliable into like single digit temperatures in multiple experiences personally. So like that is, instead of buying another $100 to $300 pad, that's an option that works quite well. It's just, obviously it takes up more space in or on the pack.
Yeah. So sticking with the theme of sleeping warm, let's maybe touch on this really quick. I don't want to spend too much time because, again, I don't think it's where people are getting wrong. But when you're talking about ratings of sleeping bags, if you're in a retail, big box store, the rating of the sleeping bag that's listed could be men or women. So pay attention to that. And it also is typically the lower comfort rating. A rule of thumb typically for that is add about 10 degrees to the rating. And that's going to give you more of an actual comfort rating on that. So just being mindful of, if I'm expecting to get to 20 degrees and I buy a 20-degree sleeping bag in REI, that may not actually equate to what you want it to in the field without wearing additional layers or doing some other things. So usually pad your sleeping bag's degree rating a little bit. With a lot of our testing, we do try to get it as close to as possible. Sometimes our EN ratings that we get back, sometimes we're right at the comfort rating or they're close, but we try to make ours a little bit more approachable to make sure people are having great experiences out there. But be aware that the listed value is not necessarily the value that you're going to sleep comfortable at outdoors. Typically pad it with 5 to 10 degrees. Also note with quilts, there's not really an official test for quilts out there. So be aware that you're at the mercy of whoever you're buying the quilt from to see how accurate their ratings are. So do some review research and see what people are saying about how those quilts sleep in the field, if they sleep a little cold, a little warm. But you might have to do just a hair more research online to discover those things.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say that's like the only downside of quilts for me, because I love top quilts. But like just for a new user of a top quilt, it's totally reasonable to have some hesitation just because of that really lack of standardized system to really have a reliable number as to what temperature rating. So yeah, you kind of have to go a little bit out of the box in research of, one-on-one talking to people that borrowing one, reading reviews, and just kind of having to rely on judgment and, other people's input.
Well, even coverage is a factor there, right? Because like someone could sleep warm in a sleeping or a top quilt that's maybe like a smaller, not as wide of one, et cetera, but they might be someone who just doesn't toss and turn throughout the night. Then you get that top quilt, you toss and turn, and suddenly you're like, man, I'm just struggling to sleep warm. And so that might have worked for one person but not the other, because maybe a different top quilt that has a wider coverage and more curves and whatnot to it, would have actually slept better. So top quilts just take a little bit more knowledge of your sleep style, maybe a little bit of research on what the consensus of general people are saying if they sleep warm, sleep cold. But again, I'm like with Brigham, I love top quilts. They're my go-to 80% of the year. So, okay. Let's maybe stick with kind of this theme of bags, pads. So let's talk about clothing worn to bed, head to toe. So obviously with the top quilt, wearing something on your head is much more important. You don't have a hood. But I would probably argue that it can be just as important on a sleeping bag, because not many people are actually cinching down their sleeping bags right down to their face. And even if they are, like, it's not cinching so tight that air's not getting in there still. Yeah. So, taking care of your head is important. So depending on temperatures, kind of my rule of thumb personally, Brigham's not quite as aggressive with this, but I'll wear like a down beanie if I'm in the 30-degree range. If I'm in the 40-degree range, might just wear the hood of my hoodie or whatever I'm sleeping in at night. 30-degree, I typically will start bringing a down beanie, and then under 30 degrees, I'll start bringing the Lofttech Hybrid balaclava that we sell, which is a full balaclava coming over your head.
It's a head puffy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I do personally. And that's not to say, though, that even in that, like, I'll still put up, because, a lot of our pieces, our base layers, our altitude, our turn base layers, they still have a hood. So a lot of times I'll still run the hood and then pull the balaclava over. That's kind of my preferred method. It's a little more comfortable next to skin and helps manage moisture throughout the night too, if you've got anything going on there. So that's kind of the 3 tiers I use when it comes to keeping your head warm. But definitely don't ignore that, because if your head's just exposed all night, you will not sleep warm, and it'll just pull heat out of you all night. Sometimes I will also run like our merino wool balaclava, or a gaiter, neck gaiter is what I'm trying to say, so that I'll actually breathe through that, so that I don't have bare skin per se showing to the cold. But that's when I'm getting into really cold scenarios in the winter, where I feel like I need to actually sleep with something like that over my mouth or nose. And even then, it doesn't usually stay there all night, but I'll kind of pull it up anytime that I remember. So there's kind of tiers to the head. Let's talk about full body then, top and bottom. I think we talk about this quite a bit, but we've got basically we're believers in wearing base layers. So for us, that would be our Highline thermal leggings, and an altitude or a turn. And then sometimes I wear a piece on my top in addition to that. So I might wear an altitude hoodie. If I've got some kind of an active fleece or something like that I'm using, I may wear that. Not always, but depending on how cold it is, sometimes I'll sleep with one more layer on my upper body. But that's typically my base layers. The goal there is to wear stuff that's going to help pull moisture off your skin, be warm against the skin. I don't like to have much bare skin exposed, so I don't like to sleep in a t-shirt. I like to sleep in a long sleeve. Same with my bottoms. I don't want to sleep in a pair of shorts. I'd rather sleep in the thermals. It just keeps a nice, even fabric across your skin, and if you've got the right base layers next to skin, they're going to help manage moisture. And if you did get a cold draft or something like that, it doesn't feel the same. It's not as shocking or whatever if you've got a layer that's going from your wrist all the way down to your ankles. So,
yeah, I'm a big proponent of sleeping with clothes on. Full length. Again, like temperature is critical. So, like, if it's really mild and warm, and you don't need to be warm, like being warm is not a concern, then obviously much of this doesn't really apply. But in temperatures where, maintaining heat is important, then I'm definitely a believer, huge advocate for sleeping in dry sleeping clothes, like Tayson described, some base layer bottoms and, kind of a base layer top, usually at a minimum, honestly, because this is an area that I feel like crosses over between just strictly being a sleeping warm issue versus a sleeping comfortable issue. And maybe I'll talk more about that when we get into the comfort side. But if we get into bed with damp clothing, our bodies are the heat source that will, frankly, actually dry out that clothing in our warm sleeping bag. But
what cost?
To me, the cost is kind of not really quantifiable. I think it would be really cool if there was an institution that could quantify this. But if to keep our bodies warm, we need to be fueled, then I believe that to dry our clothing out requires extra energy from our body, meaning more heat that is expended from our body to dry out that damp clothing. So that's why I'm a believer in just putting on a dry set of clothes when I go to bed, so that I sleep warm, but two, it's not requiring more energy from my body to generate that heat to dry the clothing, because as moisture moves away from our body, it pulls heat away from it. So that's an important thing to remember.
I would add, I just recently had an experience like that where I had some damp layers on and I was like, I don't want to change into my sleeping clothes and I want these dry in the morning. So I'm just going to go to bed with my damp clothes on, let my body do the work throughout the night, wake up the next morning. After about 30 minutes of being in a sleeping bag and a sleeping pad that I knew was well warm enough for the temperatures, but me still being cold, I was like, not worth it. So I stripped down, put on dry clothes, instantly was warm, instantly got to sleep after laying there for 30 minutes. And then I still left those clothes in the bag with me. And so they still did dry out, but they weren't next to my skin creating discomfort.
Yeah. So I say let's definitely revisit this when we get to the comfort, because I am not discounting that practice of sleeping in clothes, especially for the purpose. There are practical reasons to do it, to dry out clothing. So I think we should get that. We'll talk about that when we get to comfort.
We'll re-bring that up. Okay, so we've got sleeping clothes. Me and Brigham are both proponents of actually purposely having clothes for sleeping in. So what that looks like to me is Highline leggings, which I can wear them in the daytime and whatnot, but I'm for sure bringing, even if there's not a chance I'm wearing them in the day, I'm still bringing them to sleep in. And then I always bring 2 base layers, whether that's 2 altitudes or 2 turns or one of each, so that I can sleep so that one of those is dry in my dry bag, in my backpack, so I can put that on when I go to sleep. Personally, both do the job phenomenally well, but I gravitate towards sleeping in the turn. I just love its comfort next to skin. It's just a little bit more plush, a little bit more warm. And so I really like that. It's a few ounces or an ounce or something like that heavier than the altitude. But I really enjoy sleeping in the turn. So then let's get to feet. This is a good one. I think just going off the topic we just talked about, we switch our socks before we go to bed. Anytime you're hiking, you're likely sweating or introducing moisture to your feet. And so whether you know it or not, your socks are likely damp. And so I'm a believer in switching my socks, having a pair of sleeping socks to alternate into. And those can be really lightweight socks. They can be something else, but I like to switch so that I have a dry pair of socks on. Usually that means I'm leaving my other pair of socks in the bottom of my bag with me so that they can dry out a little bit throughout the night. And then in cold temperatures, like really cold temperatures, sometimes I'll bring the down booties. Just for that extra, I mean, I don't have great circulation personally, and so I really enjoy having those down booties. But I will say, if you get the right bag from the right manufacturer, like I would say even 5 years ago, even our own products, I would sleep with a lot colder feet than I do today. I think that the bags have just gotten better. Our baffling's gotten better. Our down fill and how much we're putting in key areas of the bag and stuff like that has improved to the point where I very rarely bring the down booties anymore compared to what I used to. I mean, it used to be like almost every trip I'd want to bring them just as like a comfort item, a confidence item. And you can still do that. They're phenomenal for that, especially if you're someone who's just, if you're going to pack some insecurities, that's not the worst one to pack. They're very lightweight, very compressible. But yeah, so if I'm getting into really cold temperatures, winter conditions, I'll probably throw in the down booties again. And there's certain other types of adventures that I'll throw them in, but for typical standard backpacking and camping, that's kind of my system. Rotate my socks and then occasionally bring the down booties if it's cold enough or warrants it.
Yeah. I think down booties are one of those pieces that it's not like you can really go wrong by taking them. They weigh like, 2.5, 3 ounces for the pair of booties in the stuff sack. And like, I think anybody listening, they know if there are somebody that needs down booties. You know what I mean? Like my mother, she is the type of person, she's been backpacking my whole life and more than that. And she's just one that knows she needs down booties.
Yeah.
She just always has cold feet. And so they're a very necessary piece for her to sleep warm in a sleeping bag. And luckily, they hardly take up any space and they're really lightweight.
I would say one of the things I would hate to see you fall into that I have tried is it's like, well, instead of bringing an extra pair of socks, I'll just bring the down booties and then I'll dry my socks throughout the night. But to just back up to what we already said, after doing that a handful of times, I've just come to the realization that it's not worth going to bed with wet, cold feet because it will take time and energy from your body to dry out those socks to the point where your feet do get warm. Will they by morning? Yes, but at a cost. And so now I don't go down that train of thought. Like I used to be like, okay, I'll just bring my regular hiking socks and then a down pair of booties. And by overheating my feet, I'll dry out the socks or some kind of a combination like that. But I don't do that anymore, and I wouldn't advise you to do that as well. So, okay, so we've talked about pad, bag, layers that you're sleeping in, head to toe. Any other like gear specific sleeping warm?
Well, I would say I think it's good for people to always understand that they have the option of sleeping with clothing that they already packed. Like, for example, if you're going on a backpacking trip and you're concerned about sleeping warm, chances are the temperatures are going to be such that you probably packed a puffy jacket or maybe a fleece or a vest or some mid-layer, right? Don't be afraid to sleep in those, assuming they're dry. But, like, that absolutely works, and it works well in terms of supplementing the sleep system we already have. But it's an interesting thing because some people just forget, like, oh, I've got this puffy jacket and I'm cold. So, but you can absolutely sleep with that puffy jacket on and it will make a big difference. So if you're trying to be a one sleeping bag person and stretch your seasons longer, or your backpacking temperature range longer or wider, then by all means, if you already have a puffy jacket, you might save some money instead of buying a warmer sleeping bag than just sleep with the puffy jacket. Now, that again kind of comes into where I definitely advocate for having some leggings or some base layer bottoms in the kit so that we can sleep in those as well. So don't be afraid to put on layers. Now, one thing to be attentive to is don't put on so many layers that it restricts blood flow. So shutting off blood flow will make a person cold just as quickly as if they didn't have the extra layers. So that's why most people get cold feet, because poor circulation. If you wear too tight of socks, you'll have cold feet. And so
we should have pointed that out. So just to say that again, make sure that your sleeping socks are not overly tight because they will cause cold feet, even if they are dry.
Yeah. So just something to keep in mind. Don't be afraid to put on an extra layer or two, and just think a little bit outside the box. Let's say you've got a little fleece mid-layer and a puffy jacket and a pair of leggings. You're already sleeping in the leggings. It's colder than you maybe thought it was going to be. Maybe put the jacket down below around your legs and wear the fleece mid-layer on your upper, or vice versa. Just think a little bit outside the box of what you already have in your pack that you can use to supplement your sleep system.
Yeah, I think that's really key. One of the things that I come across frequently is like before you get into your bag at night, a lot of times you're sitting on the ground or you're sitting in a chair or something, and it seems like my backside is getting cold, right? So sometimes, actually I would say more often than not, when I'm using my puffy, I'll actually just wrap it around the middle of my body and like warm up my butt from sitting on cold rocks or something like that. And that's helpful. The other thing to note is if you've got a quality sleeping bag with a good differential cut, throwing that puffy into the sleeping bag is only going to fill up more space and add more insulation in there. Think of it like this, what costs more to heat? A big house or a small house, even if it has the same amount of insulation in the walls, it's rated the same as far as what's in the house, it's obviously gonna take more energy to heat the big house. And so if you do fill up your sleeping bag with things like a puffy jacket, and maybe if you've got some other dry clothes you want to throw in there, that's just less space in the bag that your body has to heat. Now I say that with the caveat of if it's a good sleeping bag and has a good differential cut, because if you have some other bags out there that maybe don't have a great differential cut, when you're pushing out against the bag, it can compress some of that insulation. But if you're getting a bag from a provider like us, then just adding in some of those puffies is just going to add warmth. In fact, when I go out in the winter, sometimes what I'll do is I'll take like a 15-degree sleeping bag and layer it with a 30-degree top quilt. And that's when I'm going like well below freezing. I think we were out when it was negative 15 degrees and I did this same thing. And a lot of times I'll take that 30-degree quilt and I'll actually put it inside of the 15-degree quilt. And man, that 15-degree quilt just blows up and it looks so full and puffy, and or sleeping bag feels so full and puffy. But I've just killed, there's like not an ounce of like dead air space in that bag. And it's incredible how warm that system is. So just something to note with supplementing in additional layers.
Yeah.
Okay. Couple other things related to warmth. Let's talk about site selection of your campground. So number one, if you are right next to a water source, so there's a lot of humidity in the ground or in the air, that's going to feel colder for you. That's also going to likely create more condensation inside your tent, which can become a bigger issue later on. If you have a lot of condensation in your tent and it's getting all over your bag, or you're pushing into the tent or something like that, that can be something that can be colder as well. So if you can, go 100 yards away from the water source or 100 yards out of the valley bottom, that's going to help you sleep warmer in terms of actual temperature and also just reduction of condensation a little bit. The other thing that I was going to say that goes hand in hand with that, though, is trying to find a level spot to sleep. Like it's not do or die, but I'll give you a scenario that happens quite often. Is usually you want your head a little higher than your feet. So you set your system up like that on the levelest ground you can, but over the course of the night, you may slide into the bottom of your tent. Well, now your feet are pushing against the bottom of your tent. There's condensation that's likely building and getting onto your sleeping bag, and you're compressing the down of your sleeping bag. And so all of that is a recipe for cold feet. So finding a level spot and then using something that will keep your pad and bag in place is also a part of that. So again, we've already mentioned this once, but the 1/8-inch foam pad from us really locks your sleeping pad into place. It helps it not slide within your tent, which can help you from sliding into the side of your tent, which then creates additional cold spots on your body. So
yeah, those are good ones.
Anything, site selection, kind of covered that.
Yeah, just a couple more things on site selection. If we can, we want to position our tent, again, if we can, where there's less wind blowing. Sometimes the wind will accelerate through a narrow gap or something. So we just want to it's kind of a two-edged sword, because wind helps alleviate or mitigate condensation, but if it's really cold, it's also just going to suck heat away from us. So kind of be aware of that and apply judgment as to, do I need to have breathability to mitigate condensation, or do I need to maximize heat retention, and therefore maybe I want to be in the least windy tent site that I can find. Also, you mentioned like valleys, troughs, any like kind of place where there's a low point where cold air is going to settle and be trapped is going to be like significantly colder than something 50 yards away that may be, 15 feet higher in elevation. So I definitely look for a a slightly elevated tent site that's not at the lowest point in that given area.
Yeah. Maybe going along a little bit with condensation. Don't breathe into your sleeping bag. You're introducing moisture into your sleeping bag. So when you get cold and you want to pull your head into your sleeping bag, well, that can keep you warmer for a short amount of time. In the long run, you'll pay for that with introducing moisture into your bag. So we don't advise that. If you do get cold, pull the sleeping bag up and around your head, but make sure that you're still breathing directly out of the bag. So sometimes I do that with a top quilt or something. I might kind of pull it so that the fabric is kind of laying across my head or really getting around my head more, and then I'm breathing straight out of the sleeping bag or the quilt. So just one other kind of condensation thing to touch on. What about going to bed itself, Brigham? This is something that I think a lot of people, it's not, for some reason, it's not an easy thing to do, right? Because if you get cold, your reaction is, I want to go climb in my sleeping bag to get warm. The problem is with that train of thought, if you get into your sleeping bag with cold feet, cold butt from sitting on a rock all night, cold hands, it's going to take a considerable amount of time to reheat your body, because now you're just laying down in a sleeping bag, your heart rate is dropping, your body's going into sleep mode. So you kind of have to do that counterintuitive thing of like, I'm at least going to go hike 100 yards up this hill and back down and then get in my bag. And even if your feet and hands aren't warm by then, at least you've raised your heart rate, you've built up some heat inside your body, and you'll reheat faster. But going to bed super cold usually means you're going to lay there cold for a couple hours.
Totally. It's such a good thing to talk about with sleeping warm. We have a lot of people we have assumptions that these one or two items are just going to solve the problem or just make us warm really quickly. And we forget that our body is the heat source. So doing things like you said, hiking up a hill real quick, doing some push-ups. Another way to think of it is when our body senses that the temperature is cold, it has a self-preservation basically instinct or process where it starts to restrict blood flow to less vital areas of the body, and it concentrates the blood flow to vital organs, the things that keep us alive. So something to think about is if I'm going to bed, what little exercises or motions can I do that will increase the blood flow in the areas of my body that I'm feeling are cold right now. So if that's feet, then doing jumping jacks, hiking up and down a hill, running in place, doing high steps, just something that's going to allow motion in that area and a little bit of effort, so that it's going to require your body to release or increase the blood flow in those cold areas. And then, build the heart rate up a little bit before going to bed. I think that it's really important. Another thing that I am maybe hyper attentive to, you've probably noticed it. I'm really a bit, I don't know what the word is, but as soon as I have my tent set up, I like to get my quilt out immediately. So if it's 6 p.m., I want my quilt.
He's right on it.
I'm taking my quilt out immediately to give it as much time to loft up as possible. So, if it's 6 p.m. and I might not be going to bed till 9 or 10, that means my quilt has had 3 or 4 hours to fully loft versus leaving it stuffed in the backpack until 10 minutes before I want to crawl into it. There's just no possible way that quilt is going to be as warm when I want to feel that warm sensation of crawling in my quilt. So, warm the body up, give your sleeping system the best opportunity to keep you warm as possible. And I know that it's not always possible to do that, but when possible, I always try to loft up my sleep system as early as I can.
Yeah, and lofting it up can mean pulling it out and letting it sit in your tent. It can also mean, agitating it just a little bit too. Give it a little bit of shake and a little bit of movement. that helps it kind of untangle itself and loft up as well. One thing that I would say that I think is just a good idea is like usually the last thing you do before you go climb in your tent is go use the restroom. Just make it a practice to like walk farther out of camp and so that you can build a little bit of energy, a little bit of heat. Because it doesn't take, I would say it doesn't even, you don't even have to get hot. Like, cause you're like, man, if I had to walk until my feet got hot, that would take so long. And it's like, well, we're not even saying that, but you'll notice a difference if you walked a couple 100 yards, built up a little bit of energy, and then got in your bag, because now that can it can flow that body heat you started to develop into your extremities and make a difference. So yeah, take a hike before you climb straight into your tent, and that can make a bit of a difference. I think we've covered the big things, but I wanted to hit on a couple, like, I don't know, I'll call them tips and tricks or little hacks. So number one, depending on how far you're going and what you're doing, those little hand warmers that you can buy at the store for like $1 for a pack of 2, and especially if you're taking someone out who's not used to going out, if you take one of those and you throw it in the very bottom of your sleeping bag, because there's so much less oxygen down there too, that thing will burn pretty much the entire night. And it's in an insulated area, and so it'll like, to me, I don't really do it because they typically boil me out of my bag. I get so hot. But they can make a huge difference, especially if you're practicing all these other things and then you do just that one thing, can have a huge difference. Another one is to heat up water, put it into a water bottle, and then take that water bottle into your sleeping bag with you. Obviously, make sure the lid's on tight, you're not spilling water, you're not burning yourself, things like that. But taking a warm or hot water bottle into your bag with you, because again, you're in an insulated environment. A lot of times that water will stay warm, even on the cold trips that we do in the middle of winter, ice caves, stuff like that. My bottles of water have typically stayed warm till about 5 a.m. So you're getting 80% of the night with a warm bottle of water in there before they start to kind of get to just your normal body heat. So that's another little hack. Both of those are great little things that you can do to really make sure that you stay warm in a bag. Those are things I don't do every night, but they're kind of tools that I use occasionally for certain trips, or if I'm bringing certain people on a trip, right? If I'm bringing my kids on a trip, yeah, I'm going to bring hand warmers for them. They're going to love to sit there and hold them at night when it gets cold, and then when they get in their bag, they can throw that on the bottom of their bag, and it's just one more thing that's going to keep them warm throughout the night. So any other tips and tricks, little hacks, I guess, if there's any?
Have a warm drink before bed, have 8 or 12 ounces of hot cocoa or cider or something, where you're getting really warm fluids into your core. Staying hydrated is important. That promotes and maintains blood flow. Have some snacks, like get some calories in your body right before bed. Just forget that there's dentists out there that don't want you to do that, but just eat a Snickers, eat some crackers, just eat some calories that are just going to give your body more chance to kind of keep the burn going.
Yeah. And I don't want to get into the weeds here. Some people say to eat slow burning calories. Some people say the other direction. But I think either way, getting calories in your body is important, and it helps your body. It helps with recovery too, right? Like you're trying to replace glycogen storage in your body and things like that. And so you're trying to do that throughout the night as well to start yourself out on the right foot the next day. So yeah, eat as you're getting into bed. Stay bear safe, I guess, but get calories in you. That's definitely going to help you stay warm all night. And I would say that a lot of times I can almost notice that as much as the warmth or the additional warmth per se of going to bed with a full stomach or with calories in the system the next morning in the early hours or something like that. I think that I don't know. There's definitely benefits to eating those calories. So that's a great one. I'm glad we didn't miss that. I think we might have covered the warmth side.
Pretty good.
Yeah, it's a pretty good list. I think if you follow any or all of these, you're going to start off on the right foot and really be ready to rock. So, okay, let's just talk about the comfort side. So, I guess let's start here. It's where we started with the last one, which is your sleeping pad. there's some different directions you can go with pads. There's different thicknesses you can use. So I'll just tell you what I personally do. I like to have a 3 to 3.5 inch thick pad. And the reason that I like that is I'm a side sleeper, which typically means I'm putting more strain on my hips and shoulders in the pad. And I'm also a bigger statured guy, I guess, a little bit heavier. And so by having a thicker pad, I can let air out of the pad, which sounds counterintuitive, to soften the pad, but still keeping me off the ground. And it's just a way better, more comfortable experience. Now, if I was on a 1.5 inch or a 2 inch thick pad, or even like a 2.5 inch thick pad, it's really hard for me to let hardly any air out of the pad before I'm hitting the ground or getting so close to the ground that I'm actually losing heat or R value out of the pad. So keep that in mind. If you deflate too much, you can lose some R value or warmth out of the pad, but that's why I like that 3 to 3.5 inch thick pad. It allows me to soften up the pad and just be more comfortable throughout the night.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The thicker the pad, the more ability you have to do that. And what that does is it's just distributing our body weight more. So the more our body will conform to the pad itself, our body weight is then distributed to those contact points versus having like 3 points of contact. Our feet, our hips, and our shoulders. If your pad's too inflated and too stiff or hard, then I think in my experience that's when I've had the most like pressure, discomfort, and that just becomes irritating. I may be really exhausted and tired, but I'll be waking up. In the past when I've experienced this, I'm waking up all night like trying to toss and turn, switch sides, and just alleviate that pressure from that one area. But if we have the ability to have a little bit less air pressure in the pad, then it distributes our weight, supports certain parts of the body a little bit, and I just feel like it's more comfortable.
Yeah. Like Brigham mentioned earlier about pulling his sleeping bag or top quilt out early, blow up your pad earlier too, because most pads are made out of a nylon or a polyester, and when you blow them up, they're going to have a little bit of stretch and give. So if you blow it up and get straight onto the pad, chances are that the pressure in that pad will get softer. The pad will get softer throughout the night as the fabric stretches out just a little bit. But if you blow it up earlier, you may even blow it up kind of hard earlier. And then when you get in to go to sleep, that's when you let just a little bit of air out and dial in that pressure. But that will just help so that you're not having to deal with that in the middle of the night. Blow it up early, let the fabric relax just a little bit. And then that way, when you set your temperature for the rest of the night, it should hold better.
Yeah. One more thing on, let's call it like pad tuning for good sleep. Just, I have found that sometimes I found myself procrastinating in the middle of the night, like changing the air pressure because I just want to get back to sleep. Yeah. Even though something is really uncomfortable. But I've definitely found that it's worth it as soon as I recognize like that I'm uncomfortable because I've got too much air in the pad. It's totally worth it to just reach my arm up, a foot above my head and push the little thing. Like just all you got to do is just pop a cap and push a little thing and release some air. And then I've had much better, longer duration, good quality of sleep when I do that. When I procrastinate it, then it's I don't sleep as well. So yeah, just a thought.
And last thought I have with pads is, much like we talked about earlier, use your additional gear in the tent to help level the pad if needed. So let's say I can tell I'm on a slight downhill slope or I'm slightly rolling to one side or the other. Take some of the additional clothes you have or something like that and use that to level your pad just a little bit or put it on one side of the pad. I'll do that from time to time when I feel like it's needed, and it just helps to not be sliding off your pad or things like that. You've got tools, right? So like use everything you have to create the most optimal, comfortable night's sleep you've got. Pillow. Can definitely talk about this, and if you're watching this, you've probably seen our pillow before. We just came out with a brand new pillow that's a non-slip pillow. We've got non-slip dots on it. We've changed a few things about it. We've also added tabs for you to attach cordage if you want to actually tie the pillow to your pad. But a pillow can be really big. Lots of people, when they first start backpacking, they just don't think about getting a pillow. So then they're taking their jacket, they're sleeping on their jacket. But I always say, imagine taking a jacket and then going to your bed at your house, tossing your pillow on the ground and trying to sleep on a jacket. Like, you're not going to get the same quality of sleep as if you have a good pillow. So get yourself a pillow, one that works for you. We actually offer 2 heights in this now, a regular and an elevated. So if you're a side sleeper, the elevated may be more of the pillow you want. But, you've got options here to find and dial in a pillow that's going to be comfortable for you in the backcountry. They're cheap. They're super light. They're not worth overlooking, in my opinion.
Agree 100%. I mean, I want the best quality of sleep that I can, and I have found that the inflatable pillow has been the best option for me versus, I've definitely done the clothing thing, and especially when I was younger, it was okay, but starting to use an actual inflatable pillow was like a total game changer for sleep quality, especially, the older I get, the more appreciative I am of having a pillow. I think it's silly to feel like it's a luxury item or trivial amount of, or like too much of a extra weight to pack. Like 2.5 ounces.
Yeah.
I don't want to just get my way through the night. I want to sleep well and recover and be comfortable throughout the night.
Yeah. So pad, pillow. Do we want to talk about anything additional with the 1/8-inch foam pad? Is that one that we were coming back to? Maybe we already covered it with just...
Kind of did. Yeah, I mean, just it on comfort, I think the 1/8-inch, having a foam pad underneath, and we're talking about, I don't know, what does that thing weigh, like 3 or 4 ounces?
2.5, yeah.
An 8-inch thick piece of closed cell foam that goes under the pad. In terms of comfort, I include peace of mind and like annoyances. Like a pad sliding around on, a bare tent floor is something that for me, in personal firsthand experience, has like totally degraded my quality of sleep at night because I'm waking up and trying to slide my pad back up because I'm not on a perfectly level site. So having that pad underneath that actually, I'd say 90% mitigates my air pad from moving around on the tent floor. And that, for me, is a quality of sleep thing. It's a comfort thing, whereas I'm not, finding myself sliding into the side or the bottom of my tent, and that's a comfort issue for me.
Yeah. Okay. What else with comfort? I'm going to have to sit and think for a second. I don't have one queued up for additional comfort items.
Or I'd say to be comfortable, I want to like kind of eliminate as much mental stress or back thought. I don't know. Sometimes those are things that kind of happen. And so one of those, well, now here's one where we could talk about like the clothing thing, right?
Okay.
So I don't go backpacking or I don't go to bed at night so that I can dry clothes out. Like,
oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like my purpose of sleeping in my tent at night is not so that I can dry my clothes out. It's so that I can rest my body and my mind and recover for whatever's the next day. So we kind of talked about like the practicality of sleeping in clothing that we got or that we have in our pack, whether that's a puffy or the practice of sleeping in the clothes that we were wearing throughout the day, and going to bed with our sweaty clothes on. Practically speaking, yes, it does, and most of the time will dry out our clothing. But I've just found that I get a higher quality of sleep when I don't do that. I'm more comfortable because I'm not bothered by the dampness of, I'm a side sleeper and I switch sides throughout the night. And if my clothes are damp, every time I switch sides, I can feel the heat being pulled away as my body heat evaporates that damp clothing or dries that damp clothing, because that's physically what's happening is when damp clothing dries out, it's pulling moisture away from our body, and that process is pulling heat away from our body. So yes, being in a sleeping bag can maintain all that heat, but it's taking energy from my body that would otherwise just be used to help me sleep comfortably and peacefully. But now there's this, my body is going through this process of having an extra tax put on it by drying out my damp clothing. I don't discount sometimes the practicality of it. I would not say a blanket rule that it's just never to be done. It's just something that I pay attention to, and I most of the time am going to be sleeping in my dry set of sleeping clothes. Because again, there's that annoyance of feeling the damp, clammy skin against damp clothing. And to me, that's not comfortable. I don't want to go to bed just to dry my clothes out. I want to go to bed in dry clothes so that I can just go to bed and sleep peacefully and recover. My clothes are going to get damp the next day anyway. So,
yeah, I think I would echo that for sure. It's just not worth it in the field. It's a cool idea to dry everything out, but I'm in the same camp. I do like to try to dry things out, but the way that I try to dry things out are just put them around the bag, usually maybe down in the foot box somewhere or something like that. And they dry as much as they dry, but I'm not going for usually 100% being completely dried out. Okay, so here's two other thoughts that I had. You can consider bringing earplugs and something to cover your eyes. The eyes one, for sure, I think people should pay attention to, because a lot of times you're not watching moon cycle, and you go out there in a very thin-walled tent, a light, nylon or even a Dyneema tent, and that moon is shining bright. It can really be distracting for sleep. So having something that you can pull down over your eyes, such as a beanie or a balaclava or something along those lines, can really make a difference. Earplugs are good, but people will, as soon as they hear earplugs, they're going to think that's dangerous, And so what I would say with that is go to bed with a clean camp. Like, you'll sleep more soundly anyways, right? If you know that your food is out of camp and safe, and you're practicing good, clean camp habits, you will sleep better, right? You're not worried about stuff coming into camp. It's not a thought at all, and you can just get into a deeper level of sleep or fall asleep faster. So, make sure your camp is clean. And that sounds silly, but it does affect your sleep quality. If you hear a stick snap in the night and suddenly you're on edge and you're listening because you remembered that you left a Snickers in your backpack or something, that can matter. So, and as you do that more and more, earplugs may become something that you want to consider too as you get more comfortable out in nature. So, a couple little things. Additional comfort things. I'm just trying to brainstorm what we've missed here.
Just teeing off with what you were just saying. I would just say do some self-reflection, introspection about what preferences I have as a person. One thing I do, let me back up. The reason for that would be I want to rid my mind of mental distractions or stresses, or just whatever, any annoyance that's going to, affect my falling asleep and staying asleep. So, for example, I know myself, and one thing that I like to do, and I'm pretty sure everybody that's ever been backpacking with me knows, because they hear me shuffling around in the tent way late. I like to get everything tidied up, kind of put away in a way that I feel like my house is locked up for the night. I can just shut my eyes and go to bed. Kind of like you said, keep a clean camp. If I've got a clean camp and a tidied up tent, and I've got things where, let's say, I'll strategically place a water bottle in a certain place that if I wake up in the night and I really, am thirsty or got a dry mouth, then I don't need to go searching for that water bottle. I just know it's right there and I can reach for it. Same thing with a headlamp. If I have to get up and relieve myself, then I don't want to go looking for my headlamp. Just little things like that. I take a little fleece beanie everywhere I go, and I put that kind of in a certain place in my tent same place every time, so that if the temperature does drop to where it's waking me up at night and I'm noticing my head is a little bit cold, I've just got the peace of mind that I know that it's in that exact spot, and I just reach for it and put it on, and I'm back asleep in like 20 seconds. Just little mental things like that just kind of getting my house in order gives me peace of mind when I go to bed, and it helps me fall asleep really quickly and sleep better. So just kind of being aware of my own tendencies and preferences, sleeping habits, and just trying to do as much as I can to just alleviate any of those like mental distractions.
Yeah, I think something will happen along the lines the more you start going outside and you get familiar with your gear and your systems, that you'll have an experience where you'll climb into your tent at night and feel like you're like coming home per se. I know that I have that feeling, especially with gear we make, because I spend so much time in it that it's almost like this is my cabin, this is my sanctuary, and it's like I'm so familiar with each part of it that it feels very comfortable and comforting to climb into that tent. And you can do that. You can develop that to where climbing into your tent doesn't fill you with some fears or anxieties. It's a comfortable feeling. And I think that's what we're hoping to get you to. But speaking of alleviating different things, Brigham, one other thing that I'm going to go into the realm of here, which will sound funny to some, is the idea of a pee bottle in your tent, right? I will say this. This isn't for everyone. I don't even know how it works for the other gender, but for me, it is well worth it. Typically, what I do is I have a like platypus soft flask that I can really compress down, and it doesn't take up room in my pack on the daily basis or in the middle of the day. And I will have that in my tent there so that I don't have to get all the way out of my bag, all the way out of my tent, into the vestibule, put shoes on, get up, walk out of camp, use the restroom, come all the way back and get back in. And then you're cold, and then you're awake, and then you're, whatever it is, you scared an animal out of your camp, whatever it is, you just eliminate all of that by having something right there close at hand. The other thing that I like with this, which is not so much related to sleep quality, is that also gives me the confidence to continue to hydrate all night long, all the way till I'm getting in my tent. And hydration is such a big component for me. And I think it is for a lot of people, but for me in particular, it's just such an important thing for recovery, for getting the next day started on the right foot. But if I have some apprehension, like I really don't want to get up and use the restroom in the middle of the night, I may start cutting myself off or slowly limiting my fluids, which is not helpful for recovery. So, and we also talked about being dehydrated doesn't help you for staying warm in your sleeping bag. So something to consider for me. It's something that I've just decided it's really important for me. It helps me recover, helps me sleep better. And so those are worth taking the extra, half an ounce to an ounce of that soft flask to use as a pee bottle. So
that's a really good one, because honestly, there's a chance you may not even have to use it.
Yeah.
And then at that point, all you have is the ability to carry extra water. Yeah. For what's that? That platypus 1 liter is like an ounce and a half.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, and it takes no space. So, I mean, you're taking something usable for hydration both ways.
Yeah.
Like hydration and relieving oneself. So,
if you're real gritty, you bring like a tiny bit of soap and you can just clean it out the next day, and you like you say, you could swing back and forth.
Some have had to boil their cooking pots the next day.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one. Yes, this is true. Oh, man. What happens in the tent stays in the tent, huh? Except when you're on a podcast. What else did we miss here for things of comfort? Maybe just other things I've seen, other things that I've seen go wrong, but we're probably getting close to time, so I'll do these quick. If it looks like a cool place to pitch your tent because it's like under a tree and it feels protected or something like that, that's cool. But don't do it at the expense of getting a good pitch in your tent. Your tent is designed to deflect water, deflect wind, it's better for your tent to be set up in a spot that it can be optimized and pitched correctly versus I've just seen at times people try to sneak their tent into a tight little nook and cranny because it's actively raining when they're setting up their tent. And they're like, oh, that spot looks a little more dry or something like that. 9 times out of 10, that comes back to bite you. Just focus on getting a good quality pitch in your tent. Focus on not pitching your tent where water could be pooling up underneath you throughout the night. Being conscious of that, making sure to look up and avoid any dead trees above your camp when you're pitching your tent. But because I've had that happen, you get in your tent and you're like, dang, that wind just picked up. I really didn't look up above my tent to see if there was, any dangerous trees above me. Now I'm a little on edge. So that kind of comes back to that site selection. But eliminate the things that you can eliminate that could distract your mind or create any uneasiness for yourself. So, and that may mean something that could sound silly to other people, but I don't know, maybe it's sleeping with your bear spray close at hand. Maybe for some people, like that's the fear they have. And so that will just help them sleep better. There's not any harm in that, right? Like just be conscious of yourself, your needs, what's going to be distracting to you. And that's, that's all going to play into you getting a great night's sleep outdoors, which I totally believe you guys can have exceptional experiences out there. And like I said, you can climb into your tent and feel like you're coming home versus climb into your tent with any anxiety. So, okay. Last round. Anything?
My last comment is
good.
Treat your sleeping pad, and I'm referring to air-inflated sleeping pads when I talk about that. It's generally what I use.
Taking a jab at me right here.
No. Like treat your. Oh, are you anticipating what I'm going to say?
I'm anticipating what you're about to say.
Hey, I'm guilty of it sometimes. But treat your pad like it's your most prized, valuable possession. Treat it like it's an egg, a very fragile egg, because given conditions we're talking about where maintaining body temperature matters, so that's going to be a lot of backpacking trips for most people. Man, in terms of comfort, if you don't have that pad, that's like your comfort has gone bye-bye. Like there is no chance for being comfortable. So during the trip, just treat it like it's the most valuable piece of gear that you have. And what I'm guilty of that I don't do every trip, I probably do it half the time, is I think it's totally worth it to blow up the pad at home the day before a trip and make sure it doesn't have any leaks. Or 2 or 3 days. That way you have more time to repair it. But, I mean, if that's the one piece that can affect comfort more than anything else, then I want to treat it like it is that piece, because it is. So that's my last comment.
Yeah. Almost every piece of gear you have can be repaired in the field to a high level. Let's say you tear open a jacket, right? Like you slap a tenacious tape repair patch on it, and you might have lost a couple grams of down, and that's it, right? Same goes with the sleeping bag. If you bring a little sew kit, you can likely repair a backpack if you had to. Repairing a sleeping pad in the field is just not fun. And it requires time that you may not have. So I recently attempted to repair a sleeping pad in the field and found the hole, attempted to repair it with tenacious tape. They have glue and then a patch. I didn't get it to seal quite right, and then I was wanting to keep moving, so I was supposed to leave it out in the sun for a certain amount of time and let it really let the glue cure. And and they want 10 hours before you sleep on this thing. It's who's got 10 hours to let this, you don't want to be in that position to be trying to repair a sleeping pad in the field. It's not a fun position. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible, but it's going to likely come at a time cost, a comfort cost, and the thing is, it is a really important piece. If your pad goes flat, that's what's keeping you off the ground, and nothing else that you pack can be double used to really make that big of a difference. You can sleep on top of your backpack, but it's fabric. You know what I mean? It's not creating real loft and insulation and, locking in air pockets that are going to be insulative between you and the ground. So it is a really important piece. I think that's a really valuable thing to say. One of the ways you can protect your pad is by using the 1/8-inch foam pad. This gives you a little bit more of a barrier protection. Run your hand. I've been guilty of this, and with this last experience, I'm going to do better at it. Just run your hand across the area that you're going to be putting your pad and feel for anything sharp. You know what I mean? Or feel for anything, whatever it is. It's just worth the 2 seconds of time it takes to be a little bit more proactive with avoiding a puncture, because it really sucks to puncture a pad in the field. So. Okay, with that, I'm going to do a tease that I probably shouldn't, but if you're a Live Ultralight member, you guys know that we retail products. Keep an eye out. Towards the end of this year, we may be adding something that would be really beneficial for sleeping in very cold temperatures. We'll see if we can pull it off or not, but we'll be adding potentially some things into retail to keep your eyes out in terms of pads. But also keep your eye out on the retail side in general. We are growing and developing that. We're adding a few things in right now as we speak. I don't know when they'll be added to the website or when when this podcast will go live, but there's a handful of new brands that we're bringing on, sticking into that retail section. Things related to, I'll say electronics, things related to food. We're trying to really expand the food side of things as well. That's one of your guys' favorite parts about the membership, and just additional perks. So if you're not yet a member, go get signed up to be a member of the Live Ultralight membership. There's no way to lose. It's a win-win scenario. You get to purchase things at the biggest discounts anywhere online, and it's a one-for-one trade, right? $10 a month gives you $10 in store credit. It doesn't expire, so you can bank that up for a couple of years if you wanted to, or you can be using it as just your backpacking food fund, because you can get backpacking food from us cheaper than anywhere else. So check that out. Watch the membership. We're going to be adding some things to the retail side. But yeah, really appreciate it, Brigham, coming on, sharing some wisdom. I think that if we can help more people have less anxieties about sleeping outside, that's a really good thing. And hopefully we did that for you guys today. If you feel like we did, share this podcast, rate the podcast, and especially make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. All of those things are helpful to us so that we can continue to grow our reach and continue to help more people get outside and disconnect from this crazy world and reconnect with themselves and with friends. So, okay. With that, we'll go ahead and close it up. Really appreciate it. Like I said, subscribe. We'll see you guys on a future episode.